Good evening, everybody. Thanks. I'm Dr. Mo Gelbart. Very thrilled to be here, and thank you all for taking your time to be here as well. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm the director of the behavioral health at Torrance Memorial Medical Center and the executive director of the Thelma McMillan Recovery Center at Torrance Memorial. And as I say, very grateful for all of you to take your time. And I'm extremely grateful to Keisha and to the counseling staff and administration of Manhattan Beach Unified School District for this opportunity. You know, whenever I do these talks, it's my I feel it's my responsibility to make sure that I provide some interesting information, but most important, useful. And if you can walk away with one or two tools that you can actually implement in your lives afterwards, then I feel I've done my job. So tonight's talk, well, I'm going to share the screen for a quick second. Hold on. Hopefully you see that.
We can see it.
Okay, great. Tonight we'll be talking about teen stress and anxiety and how parents can help. And you know, prior to COVID, anxiety is extremely prevalent. It's the most common. The bad news is it's the most common, most prevalent mental health issue. The good news is it's also the most treatable of all emotional problems. And you know, the pandemic has changed the landscape regarding anxiety. Even today, with light at the end of the tunnel, vaccines, there's still no clear sign of the anxiety around it lessening. In fact, as I'm going to discuss for a while, you know, even as we are opening schools, I know Manhattan Beach School District's open. One would think this is great. Everybody's dying to get back, but it's causing its own anxiety, which I'll be covering at the last part of this. So, as I say, you know, it's very, very difficult times out there. And in addition to all the reasons that we had anxiety, we have all new reasons for having anxiety. You know, we're facing in general a national mental health crisis. And most people believe it's going to result in some long-term serious mental health issues. And again, the good news is we can do things today that will mitigate that and hopefully make it less. But the consequences of what we've been going through for the last year and perhaps still going to go through is you know, probably going to haunt us for years to come. No question it's impacting our lives. It disrupts education, healthcare, the economy, relationships. You know, we all know how difficult this has been with 560,000 people dying. Those who have experienced stress and trauma have really gone through tremendous pain and difficulty. And as I say, the long-term consequences, especially for our children, are potentially difficult. So what are your kids experiencing? But what they're facing, the unprecedented uncertainty. They have the highest levels of anxiety and depression we've had really in our lifetime, the highest rates of suicidal ideation, and the highest rates of alcohol and substance abuse. And there's a new term coined, coronaphobia, which is obviously what it sounds like, the extreme fear of anything to do with this pandemic. And if the pandemic wasn't enough, we've been dealing with elections and divided country and climate problems and natural disasters and trials on TV and police issues and racial issues and diversity and equality and equity being called for. So our society and especially our kids are under a great deal of difficulty. Oops. What are your kids experiencing? Well, first of all, and again, now it's changing a little bit, but they haven't been around their friends for a long time. And their friends are amongst the most important thing for them socially to be okay and to move on. They're anxious. They're very afraid about being behind. They're fearful and anxious about missing milestones like proms and theaters and sporting events and graduations and all those kinds of things, which may at best be modified and at worst be absent. You know, I have on here the absence of transitional moments. Again, with kids going back to school, this is changing a little, but for a year, they've missed their ability to transition from one phase to another. And what that means is, you know, normally they would be at home, they'd have breakfast, they'd go off to school, and they'd suddenly have this opportunity to experiment and develop and kind of see what life is like and then come back home to school. Well, for a year, they've been under the microscope and the magnifying glass of their family and their parents. And so they haven't been able to experience this transitional period. And of course, fear of the unknown. Anxiety, which is what we're going to talk about tonight, is totally connected to uncertainty and fear of the unknown. And when we don't know what's going to be around the corner, we tend to become anxious. So the goals for tonight, a little bit, what is anxiety? What does it look like? Where does it come from? What are the sources? And the most important part of hopefully what I'll be able to impart is what can we do for our children, and just as important for ourselves. So what is anxiety? Let's start there. First off, everybody experiences anxiety. Everybody experiences it to some degree. Worry, fear, nervous, concerned. It's on a continuum from minimal to very severe. And sometimes anxiety is positive. Sometimes it kind of gets us going. It gets the adrenaline going. It makes us prepare properly. It gives us that edge that we need. But when it's severe, it can be crippling. And another real, I think, difficulty in regards to anxiety is because we all experience it to some level. Sometimes it's difficult for us to understand why somebody else is having serious problems with something that is sort of secondhand for us. So, you know, if you have a friend who's afraid to go in an elevator, for example, and is anxious about that, it's sometimes for some people hard to understand what that's about, because we all go in elevators and we might have a little nervousness of it stopping and the lights going out, but we don't stop going. So you know, the fact that we all experience it on one hand lets us understand, but on the other hand, maybe for many people, we can't understand when people are having severe anxiety. And as I said, anxiety is normal, it's typical. Here's some age-related typical anxieties. 2 to 3 year olds are afraid of animals, darkness, fire, rain, thunder, and lightning. 4 to 5 year olds, bugs, getting lost, monsters, death. 5 to 7 year olds, germs, illness, school, natural disasters. 7 to 12 year olds, performance anxiety, social situations, burglars, war. And these normal anxieties, they come and they pass. And most anxieties that kids experience do pass. But when it becomes severe, when it becomes, interferes with functioning, interferes with day-to-day activities, then suddenly it's more of an anxiety disorder, which this is the difference between normal worry versus severe anxiety. Anxiety is a normal reaction, as I said, to stressful events. It becomes problematic when it interferes with your ability to handle day-to-day situations. And it becomes very problematic when you start avoiding, or your kids start avoiding activities or events because of their anxiety. And sometimes they may tell you directly it's due to their anxiety, and sometimes they may make up some other issue, like their stomach hurts or their head hurts, because they're too nervous or anxious to go into a situation. I should have started at the beginning also. Keisha mentioned, let me not forget, if you have any questions, put them in the chat box. We'll get to them at the end, and just put them throughout. If we get a chance somehow in the middle and I see the chat and some question is appropriate to what we're talking about, I'll stop and answer them. Let's take a look at the general process, how to the way I conceptualize anxiety. So there's 3 components. There are external stressors, which you see on the left here, things like education, money, work, people, events, environment. Those are things in our environment that are stressful. That's one component. The next component is our thought process. Well, I'd say what we call the narratives we tell ourselves. So the thinking we do, our perception about those outside stressors. And as a psychologist, that's actually not the most important, but what we psychologists and mental health professionals deal with mostly is this thinking that creates the anxiety. And then the last part is our physical reactions, which are heart pumping, sweating, tightness in the chest, headache, cold hands, cold feet. Those are all the stress-related responses to anxiety. So as a quick example, I use public speaking. I'm giving a talk here tonight. So the stressor is the talk. And my thinking about the talk is, I'm worried, are enough people going to show up? Are they going to like what I say? Are they going to be unhappy with me? And, my mind begins going there. And when I start thinking that way, now my heart races, I start sweating, I start tensing up and tightening, and then tensing up and tightening then signals me to start thinking even more, oh my gosh, something's wrong. And I go into this anxiety cycle. And the interesting thing is we can intervene at any one of these three things. So using my talk example, the stressor is the talk. I could say, I'm not giving the talk. Or I could say, good night, folks, talk's over. And I would, on one hand, relieve myself of the anxiety because I've changed the stressor. Most of the time, we really don't do that. As I said, the most important thing that I'm going to focus on is we can change how we think about things. We can change the narrative we tell ourselves. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more detail, or a lot of detail, hopefully in a little bit. And the last part is we can break the cycle in our physical reactions. We can learn how to meditate. We can learn to do relaxation. We can exercise. There are certain things we can do to calm our body down. And in the very most severe cases, we can go to a psychiatrist or our primary care doctor and get some medication which will calm us down. And that'll start breaking the cycle. Again, not suggesting that's the way to handle anxiety unless it is in its most severe form. And here's some general symptoms of anxiety on the physical part, and I've mentioned some of these: heart pounding, flushing, shortness of breath, dizziness, sweating, headache, dry mouth, stomach ache, stomach pains, nausea, diarrhea, and so on. Psychologically, it's excessive worry, irritable, impatient, always feeling on edge, fatigued, mind racing, mind going blank, indecisive, decrease in memory. And on behavioral, obsessive compulsive behavior, phobic behavior, avoidant behavior, and distress in social situations, which again, I'm going to describe in detail in just a moment when we talk about the different types of anxiety. So let's dig a little deeper into the stressors, thoughts, and physical reactions for your children. So for kids, what are their stressors? School, grades, their future. Most important, probably, or most stressful, are their friends and their popularity and how they're perceived by others, trying to make a good impression, being bullied, getting into college, their appearance. I can go on, sports, activities, pressure from peers in regards to drugs and alcohol. So as I say it, you can see the enormity of the day-to-day stresses your children encounter. And that's, on top of that, are if there are problems at home, if there are tension, if there is abuse of any kind, that's an enormous amount of stress right there. And COVID, by the way, the last year has taken away the coping mechanisms that we have, that kids have. They don't see their friends, they're isolated, they're bored. The distance learning has been, the teachers have done a magnificent job trying to stay with it, but it's been a very difficult situation for most kids. Some have experienced loss, financial loss, and as I say, home issues. And those who have been abused at home, there's nobody to really watch them or see them. For example, in school, we see kids who might be suffering from physical abuse. It comes to the attention of teachers and so on. So a lot of that's been missing. So basically, stressors have been extremely, extremely prevalent. As far as thoughts, as I mentioned, the way our bodies are wired is what's known as the fight or flight syndrome when we have a stressor jump up in front of us. So traditionally, when we think about the caveman, thousands of years ago, the stressor was a tiger or a lion or something. The caveman would make a decision: am I going to run or am I going to fight? His body would react in order to help prepare him for either that fight or flight. And let's say he decides to run, he takes off, and the lion chases him, and he runs up a tree, and eventually the lion goes away, and now his body comes back to normal. And that's been a survival mechanism in terms of fight or flight, a natural response that the body has. We've grown, we've developed, we've matured as human beings, and we have developed high-level brains, which is a great thing. But as far as anxiety goes, it's got some negative aspect to it. And one of those negative aspects is we can now think about stresses that don't even occur. And when we think about those stresses that don't even occur, our minds can go to town with them, and we can create all kinds of scenarios and manufacture our own stress without actually having that. And I think you've all experienced that. For example, if you're riding in your car and behind you is a police car and all of a sudden his lights go on, you get tense, nervous, you grab the steering wheel, your mind starts racing as to what's going to happen. Police car passes you, goes on to the next person, and you go, but meantime, your body has created a stressful fight or flight environment for you. And we do this all day without even recognizing. And in doing so, we often are creating stress. We're creating our anxiety through the thinking that we're doing about this manufactured stress. I call it, which I'm going to speak again about in a moment, the what if syndrome. We tend to catastrophize and we begin going down the road of what if, and what if this happens, what if that happens, what if this happens, and before we know it, we've created this very stressful event for ourselves. So let's see what forms of anxiety. There's various forms, and the most common is what's known as generalized anxiety. And generalized anxiety is worrying constantly about many things. It includes genetic predisposition, impaired concentration, excessive anxiety and worry, and certain lifestyle factors. The things we worry about are family, school, health, future. As I said, we catastrophize, we think of the worst, we begin having physical problems, stomach aches, headaches, nausea. Here's some of the symptoms, as I say: restlessness, fatigue, excessive anxiety and worry, increased muscle aches and soreness, impaired concentration, irritability, and difficulty sleeping. And then it's really interesting to know what are the risk factors for generalized anxiety. And I put this up primarily for this first one, which is genetic predisposition. Very often when a child will come in for treatment and anxiety is the presenting problem, we often ask, well, who in your family has anxiety? And the vast majority of times, one of the parents has anxiety as well. Now, whether that is a combination of genetic combined with, an anxious parent will transfer that anxiety unknowingly and unconsciously to their child in certain ways, and the child will pick that kind of propensity to be anxious up. So genetics plays a big part in anxiety and generalized anxiety, as does family background and lifestyle factors. Next anxiety I want to discuss is obsessive compulsive disorder. And again, as I said when we started, we all have anxiety. We all have some form of every one of these anxieties at different times. But there's a difference, as I said, between anxiety and an anxiety disorder. So what we're really concerned about here tonight is when it turns into this severe, crippling form of problem. But we all feel some obsessive compulsive, and obsessive is generally the thinking we do about things, and the compulsive portion is the actions that we do. So obsessive compulsive disorder are unwanted thoughts and behaviors, and we worry about things like germs, we worry about things like counting numbers, we worry about leaving the stove on at home, leaving the garage door open, and so the actions we do are, we wash our hands quite often, whatever our particular obsessive thought is, we try to mitigate that anxiety and control that anxiety with behaviors to try to calm it down. Unfortunately, what that does is it actually increases the problem, because it just reinforces the need to keep doing those behaviors. So for example, this is the OCD cycle. We have anxiety, as I said, distress, fear, worry. Then we have a compulsion to do something to lessen it. We actually do that and we gain relief, and then we have more obsession. So this is this vicious circle that keeps going around in this OCD world. Next kind of anxiety, which we all know of, I'm sure, are phobias. And again, we all have little phobias, not different degrees, and we're afraid of this or afraid of that. But when we talk about phobia in a anxiety disorder situation, we're talking about very exaggerated and intense fear, enough so that one cannot even participate in that activity. So we have anxiety over heights and open spaces and flying, and big one now is the anxiety of needles. A lot of people are not getting the vaccine really because they're terrified of needles. And again, for some of us, it's hard to understand because, as I said at the beginning, when we have this experience and we know we like, most of us don't like needles. So if I don't really like a needle, I can understand your desire to be anxious about it. But when you say you'll faint if you even go near a doctor who has a hypodermic in his hand, sometimes it gets hard for us to understand that. Social anxiety, and a lot of your kids have social anxiety issues. And social anxiety is more than just casual shyness. It is isolation, withdrawal from activities, total fear of getting into any kind of social situation. As you see here, the symptoms include running away, muscle tension, lump in their throat, blushing and sweating, shaking, nausea, racing heart, avoidance. And again, risk factors are similar to the generalized anxiety, and genetics plays a big part, as does parenting style. The other thing which is on here, which is really important, is early traumatic event. There are studies called ACE, adverse childhood experiences, and the more adverse traumatic experiences a child has in their life early on, the more likely they are to have one of the major emotional disorders, including an anxiety disorder. So the common thread on all of these is, oh, I'm sorry, I missed one, panic attacks. I missed one probably because it's the most disabling of all. A panic attack is another form of anxiety, which is the most disabling. It's a sudden terror and a sense of incredible dread that one cannot even continue on in where they are. And generally, they have trembling and upset stomach and sweating and dizziness. They feel like they're going to faint or pass out or die or go crazy or something's going to happen. And generally, they run away from the situation that they're in and they feel better. And although that sounds like it's a good thing, it actually reinforces that pattern, and that panic attack gets even stronger. So the common thread, as I was saying, in all of these anxiety disorders is they're a result of thinking, and they're a result of what we call irrational thoughts versus rational thinking. I personally don't like the term, although it was coined by Albert Ellis and Aaron Beck, famous psychologists 50 years ago or more. So it's not meant to think, I don't like it because it sounds like it's crazy thinking. It's not. Irrational thinking means it's all or none thinking, black or white thinking. It's when you hear yourself saying how you should act, or when things are right or wrong. Whenever we are polarize an issue and make it only this way or only that way, we wind up beginning to create this unrealistic, irrational thinking, which often is what's behind anxiety disorders. So as an example, here are some examples of irrational versus rational thoughts. So, irrational would be how awful, and rational would be this is disappointing. Instead of I can't stand it, it's I don't like it, but I'll deal with it. Instead of I'm stupid, it's what I did was stupid. Instead of he stinks, it's he's not perfect. So instead of seeing things as all or none, what we try to learn to do is dilute that kind of irrational all or none thinking and turn it into rational, I call it gray, living in the gray zone. And doing so is part of what reduces anxiety. As an example, one method for dealing with anxiety is something called thought stopping. And so when I work with somebody who has anxiety, these are the 4 steps. I ask them, identify the thinking, the irrational thinking that usually there's 1 or 2 common threads. So somebody will basically say something like, I never will do ABC. I'm never going to be able to get my work done right. And then they'll feel anxious about it. So I tell them, okay, first step is identify it, and then have a disputing thought, a rational thought. Well, the work may be hard, but I'll be able to do it. I may not do it as well as I want, but I'll get it done, and eventually I'll improve it. You notice there's a little dilution from that all or none thinking. And then we ask people to say, okay, here's the steps. 1, when you find yourself hearing that anxiety-producing irrational thought, literally in your head, say, stop. Sometimes I ask people to wear a rubber band and just go, stop. Take a breath, which allows your brain to relax for a minute. Repeat in your head the rational thought, and then reroute your mind and move on. And what happens is the subjective feelings of anxiety begins to go down as one does that. So that's just an example of how to deal with these irrational thinking. So let's take a look at what now, the last part of this, and the most important, as I said, is what can you do with your child or yourself who may be experiencing anxiety? First off, the key to most problems with our children is communication, of course, and is dialogue. And especially with anxiety, it's important to accept what your child feels is real. Don't judge them, don't minimize. And it's extremely important, as I say, probably every talk I give, you have to talk so your kids will listen, and listen so your kids will talk. And there's a well-known study by Dr. Glenn. They polled kids and they asked them, who would you most like to talk to if you had a problem? And the vast majority said, I'd like to talk to my parents about that. Then they asked them, who do you talk to when you have a problem? And the vast majority of them said, I talk to my friends. And the reason is they don't feel heard. And so here they are with problems and with issues and with conflicts, and they're going to people who have no better understanding of it than they do. So again, we need to talk so our kids will listen, and listen so they talk, and not minimize or judge their feelings. And normally, by the way, as parents, we don't judge it because we are angry or upset or don't, but we do it because we want to try to help them. So when they say they're really scared of something, we have a tendency to say, oh, don't be afraid, don't be scared. And that's kind and caring, but oftentimes it misses the point. So here's some examples about how to communicate about anxiety with your child. So instead of saying, calm down, we need to say, I'm here with you, I understand. Instead of there's nothing to be anxious about, we say, is there anything I can do to help you right now? Or just simply listen. That's never going to happen, right? Instead, we ask them, would you like to talk about it? Or you need to relax, or it's all in your head. If you notice, all of these, instead of this column, is a way that we don't validate how our child feels. And validate means we have to understand that when they tell us what they feel, we have to respect and honor and let them know that given how they think, we understand that it makes sense that they feel that way. So as I say, very, very important to not judge, not minimize, and validate their feelings. I talked earlier a little bit about changing this negative thinking. So what if rather than what is rather than what if. When I work with people that do this what if thinking, I ask them, I say, take one letter in your thinking. Just change what if to what is. Change the F to an S. And then ask, and because the what if is a form of catastrophizing. A child will say, well, what if I go to school and the kids don't like me? Well, what if they don't like me? Then I won't have anybody to talk to or hang out with. But what if I don't have anybody to talk to or hang out with, and people think I'm strange? What if they think I'm strange? Nobody will invite me. And they can go on before they know it. They've painted themselves in this tremendously terrible corner. So when we work with someone like that, we say, take a breath and ask yourself, what is? Because what is exists in the present, number one, and what is allows you to deal with things you can control. So we try to get them to live in the moment, live in the present, live today, not with what's going to happen, and then try to control the things that they can control with what will happen, which is part two of this coin, this other side of the coin, and that is helping your children understand that there's things they can control and there's things that they can't control. And what's really important is controlling the things they can and letting go of the things they have no control over. It sounds simple, and it's actually, the term I use is it's simple, it's just not easy. The concept is simple. And so, for example, this is a COVID-related chart. So I can control my positive attitude, how I follow CDC recommendations, my own social distancing, turning off the news, limiting my social media, finding fun and things to do at home. I can't control if others follow rules, the actions of others, predicting what will happen, the amount of toilet paper at the store. That's probably an old one. So the things we can generally control are things we are in charge of, that are behaviors, And what we can't control are other people's behaviors. But again, this helps reduce the anxiety. It puts people in the present. It gives them a sense of empowerment and a sense of control over their lives, rather than things which are way off in the future, haven't even occurred, and that they begin to catastrophize over. Basically, in some level, this is about changing perspective and seeing the glass as half full versus the glass as half empty. And here's the great thing about this analogy of the glass half empty. In order to see if you see the glass as half empty, you're going to feel down, unhappy, relatively negative. If you see the glass as half full, you'll be up, positive. And the beauty of this concept is the water in the glass does not have to change. The water in the glass remains exactly the same. It's our perceptions that we can alter. And when we change how we see something, we change how we feel. And that is, many of you may have heard the term cognitive behavior therapy. Well, I think all therapy is cognitive behavior therapy, because what we're really trying to do is change how somebody perceives something. And in doing so, we can change their emotional feeling experience. So I said earlier, there are this physical side, physical reactions to anxiety, and there's many things one can do to cope with, to improve that. Mindfulness is a incredible tool. It's an incredible skill. What I think is great, I've always had, I've tried to study mindfulness really for 25 to 30 years, and I've had a difficulty. Maybe it's coming from New York or something, and I'm just too type A'ers. But I've tried, I've taken mindfulness classes and so on. But here's what I find that works. There are common apps like Headspace and Calm. I personally use Calm, and I can plug my cell phone, put my earplugs in, and for 5, 10, 15 minutes, I can go through a mindfulness exercise, and I feel great, or it helps me sleep at night. And so there are people who practice mindfulness and learn it as a tool in their life. But even if you can't do that or don't want to take that time, there are ways in which you can learn enough to make a difference. And there's just tons of studies about what benefits it has for your physical and mental health. Other ways of coping with physical symptoms of anxiety is exercise, yoga, eating healthy, of course, limiting or eliminating your caffeine if you don't have if you have severe anxiety. And as I said earlier, if it gets very severe, there's always medication that can break the cycle. Some other tools include distraction. So if you find something else to do, something else to put your mind to, sometimes it's, there are people who do things that stick their hand in a bucket of ice for a moment, and that distracts that severe anxiety for enough time to, as I say, break that cycle. So some form of distraction, having perspective, having gratitude. I ask people to keep a gratitude journal every day, to write down 3 good things that happened to them. They don't have to be big things, but if you just pay attention to the things that you're grateful for in your life, it has a positive impact on both anxiety as well as most other emotional difficulties. As parents, we need to take our foot off the gas during this time. Well, at one point, we need to help our kids move forward and get through this. At the same time, we need to recognize that it's different. Times are different, and hopefully they will all get what they need within some time, but it's not all going to happen all at once. So again, important to take your foot off the gas. Remember, we're in an epidemic, and have your kids try their best, but not overwhelm them. Developing routines. I think as they're getting back into school now, very important to do. And as I practice the rule of 3 good things I mentioned. So let's talk about reentry for a moment. And reentry is getting back. So schools are ready to reopen. Everybody thinks it's great. Everybody's so thrilled, except it's not everybody. 39% of young people said they weren't ready to go back to school, that they're experiencing anxiety and uncertainty about returning to school. I forgot, by the way, I'll do it now because I was going to say I run a parent chat group, and in this these lecture series are sponsored in part by South Bay Families Connected, which if you are not familiar with, you should go on their website. They have incredible information, great source of articles and videos. And but with Laura McIntyre of South Bay Families Connected, I run the parent chat group every Monday. We've been doing it for 3 years. You know, as schools were getting ready to reopen, I don't have young children, by the way. My children are grown. I have young grandchildren, but they're too young to. They're in preschool. But the point is, I assumed everybody's going to be thrilled, but the parents were expressing how many of their children were not only not thrilled, but afraid and anxious about going back to school. And many were not going to go back. And sometimes even within the same home, it was divided. One child wants to go back, another child does not. So again, all I'm saying about this is it's not a panacea. You know, opening schools is great. It's a sign of progress, but just keep in mind, not all children are feeling good about doing that. And here's what some of them are saying. I feel like my anxiety will get worse when I go to school like it did after the holidays. My friends will continue to exclude me. If we stop social distancing too soon, it could start to spread again. I broke up with my ex during quarantine. I don't want to see him. My family's going to get sick. I'm Asian and I feel like people are going to be very racist. I'm going back to school and getting bullied. When we go back to normal, all the good things for the earth will reverse and global warming. I'm afraid people in my class, they threaten and hurt me, but they can't do that digitally. So many children are afraid, and although there's this initial desire to return to school, whatever issues and challenges they were having prior, they're afraid will return ultimately at some point. So how do we manage this reentry anxiety? So again, similar to what I said earlier, communication and dialogue, we have to be open to their feelings of anxiety and uncertainty and validate those feelings. Again, so when they say, I'm afraid my kids are going to make fun of me, we don't say, we wouldn't say, hopefully, oh, don't worry about that, or it'll be fine, or they won't anymore, or whatever things. Again, we want to try to make them feel good, but in doing so, we wind up invalidating their feelings. And when we do that, one of two things happen. They either shut down and say, I'm not going to speak to you about that. And they get either angry at you or they get depressed. They either turn it on themselves or they turn it on you. So again, very important to learn how to validate their feelings. We need to manage our expectations, and we need to be honest and encouraging, not only reassuring. In other words, not only telling them it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay, but we need to be honest with them. And we also need to help them accept that things are different right now. Things are not the same. And even though schools are reopened and much of society is reopened, we're still in the midst of this. And so, by helping them accept that things are different, it actually lets them be more okay with how they feel. And we need to understand that returning to school, as I said, returns them to their pre-COVID difficulties. So remember, in summary, we have gotten through this well, most of us. There is a light at the end of this tunnel, and through this pandemic, there are lessons we've learned, and we've learned, many of us, how to thrive rather than survive. And as this last slide says, we need to stay flexible. So with that, I thank you for your time.